Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon for those of you in East Tennessee. Happy lunch hour. Thank you all so very much for joining us for another installment of your Tennessee Urban Forestry Council's webinar series. This is our April edition. Happy April. I hope you are enjoying the wonderful warm weather that we are experiencing. I know that Katie and I both had to shut our blinds because it's so darn bright. We're not used to it. We're used to the winter sadness. So I, for one, am really excited to be here in this warm part of the year now. Hopefully it stays this way, but we'll cross our fingers. Today, we have a talk on invasive vegetation and herbicide use with Chris Graves. But before I get into all the kit and caboodle and Chris's bio, Katie, do you want to give us a quick rundown on like the CEU situation and all the housekeeping?
Yes. Okay. I'm going to pull up my notes here just because it makes my life easier. So if you are on here today and seeking ISA CEUs, please make sure that your name matches with the name you used when you registered for this webinar. Currently, we submitted this webinar for approval, so it's pending approval for ISA CEUs, but we do expect it to go through. But please make sure you've registered. If you are not a member of TUFC, please make sure you have paid the $10 fee. And again, just make sure that your full name is showing to get credit. We will also show a QR code at the end that will help us identify everyone who registered to receive those ISA CEUs. If you're a member of TUFC, no payment is needed. And also if you're just a general attendee, no payment is needed. And if you do have any questions during the presentation, please put those in the chat and we will answer those at the end. And I believe that is it. Imagine I'll send it back to you.
Thank you so much, Katie. I see we have a few more people trickling in, but we'll get started in just a second. But just some quick announcements from us here at the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council. We do have some dates that we wanted to share with you. We are currently in the works of planning a PPQ course here in Chattanooga, Tennessee this year on the 29th through 31st of July. So if for those of you that are interested in attending that course, please keep your eyes out, keep checking in on our events page on the website because we are going to be hosting that. We just got confirmation for our speakers, so keep an eye out for that for those of you that want to join. We also are going to be hosting another ISA prep course this year from August 26th through 28th. So again, if you've got folks that are interested in becoming an ISA certified arborist, share that information with them. And then finally, we officially have some news on our annual conference. This year, we're going to get a little spooky, and we're going to have the conference on October 29th through 30th with pre-conference workshop the day before on the 28th. So keep your eyes open for that. Hopefully we'll have a costume contest. I'm not sure at this point, but we've got a lot of stuff cooking and a lot of stuff in the works. So please come see us in person, though we are very happy you're here with us online today. And I am very excited to welcome our speaker back with us. He's a three-peat at this point, so he's a part of the crew now. Today we've got Chris Graves joining us again. Chris Graves is awesome. As you guys know, if you've been on our series, you've seen him do his talks before. He's a UT Extension Forestry and Wildlife specialist and certified wildlife biologist. Chris became an extension specialist in 2023 after serving as a senior lecturer for quite some time. He's worked for the School of Natural Resources since 2013, and he is a graduate of UT, which, always helps out. Go volunteers. So all right, I will pass it over to Chris to get us started. Again, put those questions in the chat and let's get going.
Yeah, you've got a real gift there. I just want to say, so nice work on the announcements and very engaging. So hopefully I can kind of continue on. I appreciate everybody being on here. Even though I can't see you, that makes it a little awkward, but we're going to go through this presentation. I did notice in talking with Katie that there's less people on here versus the winter tree ID session that we had. So I want you all to kind of stop and think about that for a minute. Very popular winter tree identification, but probably because I put herbicide use in the title of this presentation, that might have been somewhat of a deterrent. I hope not, but let's talk a little bit about herbicides today, and I think in many cases you'll find that it's going to be a necessary tool when managing invasive vegetation around your landscapes. So here we go. I do have responsibilities statewide in forestry and wildlife management. And I should go ahead and mention this. Most of the work that I do is on a landscape scale. So we're talking, hundreds or thousands of acres in most cases. So if you have any questions, do put them in the chat and we'll get to those a little bit later. You'll notice it here, we've got a toolkit, right? And if you think about management and restoration, the kind of work that we do in forestry and wildlife management specifically, we've got all these different tools available to us. Prescribed fire, we have lots of different mechanical methods to manipulate the landscape and ecosystems. A lot of exciting stuff because we can restore ecosystems, but one of those important tools that we have is herbicides. One thing I want to make very clear is you'll never hear me be cavalier about using herbicides. So you'll notice that little bullet right there, carefully and strategically applied. So when we talk about that one tool, herbicides, and herbicide applications, we should be careful and we should be strategic in how we use them in our landscapes. So here we go with Aldo Leopold. He's considered the father of wildlife management, started the first wildlife education program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Wrote a Sand County Almanac. If you don't have a Sand County Almanac in that book, I recommend that you get it, put it on the back of your toilet seat, and you can read a section at a time as you sit and go to the restroom. But before you know it, you'll be through the book if you go on a regular basis. But yeah, Aldo Leopold, let's talk about him. And this quote specifically, it says, one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. Much of the damage inflicted on the land is quite invisible to most. I would guess that most of you may have some kind of ecological education or background. Some of you may not. But do know that I now live in this world. I live this 24/7. So it's beyond just my career, but even at home. So I'm constantly looking when I travel down the road. This is just something, it's part of my life, it seems, 24/7. And it can be a lonely world, I will say that. But here's another thing you may not know about this campaign, but maybe you've seen this on some of the barns if you're in Tennessee and you've been traveling around. But this Everywhere You Look UT campaign, in a nutshell, they're more or less saying that UT has had some kind of impact across the state, whether that's on a farm or in someone's yard. Usually we've had some kind of influence, hopefully some positive impact on people. But I think where I was going with this is if you climb into my world and you travel with me, because I cover the entire state, as I'm driving across the state, everywhere I look, I see invasive plants. I'm careful. I try to stay on the road and pay attention to the highway and the people in front of me, but it's hard not to see all the wounds throughout Tennessee and even beyond in other states where I work. And here's just a few examples. You can see the Bradford pear. This is a species that's now illegal to sell in 3 states. Not Tennessee yet, but a lot of Bradford pear across the landscape, and we know the problems associated with it. Another example, here's winter creeper or climbing euonymus, just on a tree, next to somebody's house in the woods. Other examples, as you can see, our landscapes are just saturated with invasive plants. They really are. You don't have to leave our campus, but if you do, and you go to downtown Knoxville or north of Knoxville, west, if you go to West Tennessee, a lot of times this is what we see. And that's a landscape saturated with invasive plants. This is a real problem. And I don't want to say it's going unnoticed, but more or less, there aren't a lot of people that's taking action to try to correct this problem. Just some examples. Lower right, we have miscanthus, Chinese silvergrass. It's still being planted in many landscapes today. The bottom right is Japanese stiltgrass. Some people refer to it as Nepalese brown top. Top right is Chinese privet. Top left is bush honeysuckle or a muir honeysuckle. but we see it everywhere. If you really want to see it, what I would recommend is right before bud break. Keep this in mind. I don't know if you're taking notes, but right before bud break, almost everything that you see out there in our fields and in our woods that is green at that time, right before bud break, is probably from another country and probably invasive, very likely. Another thing is right after leaf fall. So right after leaf fall, pay attention, because if things are still green, it's very likely probably from another country and often invasive. So the spread of invasive species, it's a big deal. We'll get into some details about that as we move on, but it's our fault. That's all there is to it. Whether we're talking about free-ranging house cats or we're talking about all these non-native plants here today. And it's costing us a lot of money. It's well over $100 billion now in damages. And then, of course, the costs associated with treating invasive vegetation and all the state and federal agencies and even NGOs that are involved in this. When we try to restore ecosystems, which a lot of people are working on now, that's something that we've kind of transitioned. We're really working on kind of ecosystem restoration at landscape scales at this point in this profession. And most of the time, we have to start with invasive vegetation and getting control. I think the horticulture industry, I don't want to pick on them too much. I've got a lot of good friends here at UT that are professors in plant sciences, and they're awesome. They really are. To name a few, like Natalie Bumgarner, she's a rock star, right? So Dr. Bumgarner's great. We have a bunch of others, but I will say the horticulture industry is lagging behind. They really are. So all you have to do is go to a local nursery, unless it's a native nursery. If you go to any other nursery operation or even some of the big box stores, you'll just see lots of exotic plants, and some of those may be on our invasive species list. And this is madness. This is stuff we need to just stop. I'm not sure we're ever going to. It may be built into our culture, our kids and our grandkids. I'm not sure. But when you're planting something that needs to be watered on a regular basis throughout the duration of its life, you're using clean drinking water on these exotic plants, maybe just because they're pretty. And I want to really give a shout out to all of our native plants that are out there that are just phenomenal. We have a phenomenally diverse landscape, beautiful native vegetation that we need to be taking advantage of, propagating in some cases when things need to be planted. So yeah, plant native. I don't always recommend planting. Usually what you need and want is already in the seed bank, for example. That's the upper few inches of soil that's got an infinite variety of seeds depending on the conditions. When they germinate, if they germinate, if you give them an opportunity, then you'll be pleasantly surprised that you don't oftentimes have to plant anything, whether we're talking about annuals or perennials or even woody vegetation. I was just at the UT, one of the UT farms 2 weeks ago, and it was a training event, and I didn't have to take more than 10 steps, and I was able to get a good sample of 8 different non-native invasive species to show the group. To me, that's alarming. That is very alarming. So, keep that in mind. Again, the landscape is absolutely saturated, and we've got to do something. We've got to start working together, and hopefully you'll get something out of this presentation that you can use or at least find useful. And then it seems like, are we ever going to learn? So I think one of the first cases that proved we don't need foreign plant materials is the American chestnut. So we've got over 1,800 species of plants in Great Smoky Mountains National Park alone. And yet there are people all around the park boundary that are planting things from other countries. So to me, that just doesn't make a lot of good sense. And then if you reflect on how important this tree was, it should just about make you angry that we don't have an opportunity to see it and enjoy all the fruits from this tree. I mean, this was hands down the most important tree throughout this region. undoubtedly. I recommend you read this book. I don't know if you're taking notes, but if you are, there's the title, The Life, Death, and Rebirth of the Perfect Tree. Is a great journalist. She's from California and did a phenomenal job putting together this book. Highly recommend it. And then we have a lot of wildlife species that are declining at alarming rates. For example, eastern meadowlark. It's not just grassland birds. There's a whole suite of species that are declining, and it's not just birds either. We can look at reptiles, amphibians, a lot of the native plants, and many others that are declining at alarming rates across the landscape, and especially since, about 1960 or 70. And then are we just going to stand by and let these invasives, let the invasion continue? There you can see Knoxville in the background, and what's in the forefront there, Bradford pear. A lot of people working in the office buildings. I'm here in my office right now. I'm on UT campus, and there's probably some plants out here on the ag campus that I need to go treat right now as soon as this is over. I think most of us, this is our conservation ethic, so to speak. This is probably a good picture of it. There's David Attenborough. A lot of people, that's maybe your hero, but we tend to complain about invasive plants. We tend to kind of wring our hands over invasive plants, but there's not a lot of people taking action, and maybe many that don't recognize how critical this is that we address this problem. And I want to put this out there. Used to, I guess I was a little bit more of a purist, so I would use the word eradication, and I just have learned that we need to use the word control. We can control non-native invasive vegetation. We'll never really eradicate it, but we can keep it under control, keep it contained. And in some cases, you may be able to remove it from a particular area, but you always have to have in your mind that, this is not a one and done type deal. So, endeavor to persevere. Outlaw Josie Wells, Clint Eastwood, great movie. Y'all might want to watch that if you haven't, but endeavor to persevere. That's something to consider when you get into invasive species management. And I would say these are really the 4 steps, and that's identification, positive identification of the tree, the vine, the shrub, the grass, the forb, whatever it may be. Positive ID is going to be necessary. Early detection is key, because with early detection, that's going to save a lot of time, money, and resources. I would say this is big time, early detection. And then taking some form of action to try to address the problem and control the species and prevent the spread. And then monitoring. You've got to follow up. You've got to monitor, and that's annual monitoring, maybe biannual monitoring, checking sites. And if something pops up, you generally can use spot applications to deal with the problem. All right, here we go with a brain teaser. So I've probably lost some of you already, and we'll do a quick ID quiz as sort of a brain teaser. Y'all can't really interact verbally with this, but you can from your couch or office, wherever you're watching this. Maybe you're driving down the road, and you shouldn't be driving down the road and watching this. But here we go with some ID. I recently had a friend that asked me about this tree. He wanted to plant it in his yard. He wanted multiple trees of this species. So this is Royal Paulownia. I won't get into all the details about how terrible this tree is, but just an example. Mimosa, sure a lot of you got that. Springs on the bottom, fall on the top. Bradford pear, actually calorie pear, far removed from the tame Bradford pear you could buy at some nurseries. I also wanted to mention arsenal alone is not effective. If you want to make a note about that, we'll get into herbicides, talk about imazapyr, which is the active ingredient in arsenal. Tree of heaven. Spotted lanternfly. Did you want me to just keep going? Here's another one, woody shrub. Chinese privet. Garlon alone is not effective on Chinese privet. The active ingredient in it is triclopyr. This is autumn olive. We also have thorny olive, or Eleagnus is the genus for this woody shrub. Got a note. Roundup or glyphosate alone is not effective on autumn olive. It will expect suckering and sprouting. Here's the bush honeysuckle or bush honeysuckles if you look in some of the guides. And another note. Garlon, again, triclopyr is the active ingredient in Garlon alone is not effective on the bush honeysuckles. And then we have bicolor Lespedeza, also known as a shrubby Lespedeza, Lespedeza bicolor. Sericea Lespedeza, also known as Chinese Lespedeza in some field guides. Everyone knows this one. I'm almost certain of that. Kudzu. This is kind of the poster plant, but there are others that I would consider far worse. Multiflora rose. There are a lot of non-native roses that we have to deal with. There's a carpet that you see oftentimes in our woods of a grass. If you look at the blades, it has parallel veination. Japanese stiltgrass. Actually got its start, I guess. I think it got its start in Knoxville, Tennessee. Chinese silvergrass or miscanthus. But this is an example of early detection. So I would encourage you maybe to try to learn some of these plants. And what you can do, and what I've learned, especially teaching college students, is you can develop a search image. And once you develop a good search image, I mean, you can start picking out a lot of these plants from a distance or even driving your truck up a Forest Service road. And then we have resources, though, for ID. So this is one of the guides here at the top that's also an app. And then another app here at the bottom, Seek. I know our graduate students use Seek, which is by iNaturalist on a regular basis. It works really well. Don't always count on that being accurate. I would say when you get into forbs, which are broadleaf herbaceous plants, a lot of people would just refer to them as flowering plants, but they're herbaceous, they're not woody. Seek is a good one, and it'll be accurate probably 90% of the time. Once you get into the grasses, good luck, a lot less accurate. But then there's a management guide, and I've got it, right here. So this is a small management guide, but very good and a useful resource for managing and trying to control invasive plants throughout our southern forests. So considerations, we talked about this, species ID, but then you also have to look into, especially if you're going to use herbicides, the surrounding vegetation, the field conditions. So think about that. Do you have, for example, a plant like winter creeper? And if you do, is the herbicide you're going to use going to have an impact on any hardwoods that may be there if winter creeper's growing in a hardwood forest? So think about surrounding vegetation. Think about the field conditions. Also, size and scale is going to matter. Best time of year for treatment. When we use herbicides, there's generally going to be a best time of year, undoubtedly. And then best treatment methods. We'll get into some methods here, and I'll go through a list. And then if you use herbicides, use the most effective herbicide. And there may be a mixture of herbicides you could use that would be more effective. And then site prep is sometimes necessary. So all this, though, is going to really what'll drive all these decisions are going to be your budget and, of course, your manpower and equipment that you may or may not have much of. So we'll get into some details. This is more of a DIY. Yep. So do it yourself. I always recommend that, if you're working, let's say at an arboretum, then you should always have a backpack sprayer, a spray bottle, and probably a hatchet in the back of the truck. And in that way, as you have that, you've already developed the search image. We got into that. So you've got this search image, you spot something, it's just a little patch of this or one of this, one of that, that sort of thing. That one bush pops up, that winged burning bush, for example. Then you can get out of the truck, grab the backpack sprayer, go spray it, you're done. You just continue on your way, and now you've controlled it before it goes to seed or before it generally can spread and get beyond control and where it's going to be cost prohibitive. So yeah, keep that in mind. Really important, I think, for so many of our people in our profession. And then, are you going to hire somebody? This is an option. Many of you may not be aware of this, but there are folks out there that can do the kind of work that you may need on more of a landscape scale. We'll get into some details about that, but we use aerial application oftentimes. The top example there, that's hiring, for example, a helicopter. We're not in the deep south. If we were in the deep south, we'd be looking at about $60 or $85 an acre. But since we're in Tennessee, they're usually helping us as they're passing through and working on power line right of ways and stuff. So we're typically looking at about $100 to $150 an acre, depending on if you bought the herbicide or you buy the herbicide or not. And then drones, we'll get into details about the drones, but I'm really excited about this. I think this is going to be sort of the death knell for kudzu if used appropriately. And then other application methods, ground application. These are skidder sprayers. You won't see that much. I won't spend much time on that. This is not necessarily a forestry talk. A lot of people do have tractors though, and you can get both boom sprayers and boomless sprayers. So keep that in mind. If you're working in the woods, you might want to get a boomless sprayer. And you can even get a boomless sprayer to go on the back of a four-wheeler or an ATV. And then, of course, you can have long hoses. You can see there's a tank on the back of a UTV, a side-by-side, and you can get in places, especially as invasive species pop up along our roadsides, then you can spray them as appropriate and deal with the problem and walk away. Just come back and monitor and spot spray as needed. More ground applications, as you can see, using four-wheeler, UTV, different types of spray equipment. If you have any questions about any of that stuff, I'm easy to find. And then ground applications. This is a crew that's working on a research project for the University of Tennessee, and they're going in and actively spraying woody vegetation. And this is a bunch of graduate students kind of lined up, and some of you all may be in this situation where you have a crew of 4 or 8 people, and maybe you can get backpack sprayers and go in and do the work that needs to be done from the ground. And this is more DIY, but you can hire contractors to do this as well. And we're doing it a lot in forest management operations now, and that's hack and squirt. We do a lot of mid-story removal and things like that. But this method works very well in controlling non-native invasive trees that might pop up on properties that you may manage. And there are different types of tools. That's a Corona blade on the left. You can only get that. Well, the good one is out of California, so that's called a Corona blade. Fiskars is a pretty good price for hatchets and machetes. And of course, I like to use hatchets on bigger trees that have dense wood. But then when you get into like shrubs, then I prefer machete. And then we we're constantly doing this stuff, but small chainsaw, not a large chainsaw. Small is usually better. You're going to be able to run it for a longer period of time, but doing what we would call the girdle and spray technique to try to control invasive trees, paulownia, tree of heaven that's gotten really big, kind of too big for a hatchet. Get out there and girdle and spray it. Stump spray application. So this would be a cut stump treatment that you see here. But notice one thing, we're spraying only the cambium layer, not the heartwood. Those are just dead cells in the center. And then if you have the ability, you could get a battery-powered chainsaw. You could also use a drill and use like a drill and spray technique. You're just a real scary woodpecker out there because you're following up that drill hole with 1 squirt of herbicide. And then site prep. So a little bit about site prep. I think this is a tool that's fantastic. If you hire somebody to do this, my guess is they're going to charge you around $1,800 per day. But if you have a good operator, they can cover a lot of ground using a forestry mulcher. So keep that in mind. You can also rent these from if you have a local Bobcat dealer, and there are different types. This one would be a little more heavy duty, but might be necessary to get the job done as site prep to come back then and spray once things sprout. But it gives you access. And then, of course, here's a batwing mower. We've got goats. Premier One Fencing. I'm not supposed to, this is not a commercial, but Premier One Fence Company, they have really good supplies. And I've done this where I've moved my own goats around so that I could just get into these areas that were covered up in multiflora rows and privet, so on and so forth. And once they, eat it out, then you can get into those areas, have good access, and do the necessary work that needs to be done with maybe a small chainsaw and some herbicide. And then site prep using, prescribed fire as a management tool, excellent for site prep. Low intensity prescribed fire is generally ideal in most places. Of course, if you burn a kudzu patch, it's going to be extremely volatile and hot. So you got to know what you're doing. Probably need professional assistance. All right, part 2 of this. Here we go. So I'm moving along, but here's a website that I highly recommend you look into when you're using herbicides. This is kind of a one-stop shop. So it's that, and you can just Google CDMS herbicide. It'll pop up, be the top one. And when you click on it, then you can type in the herbicides that you're interested in, look at the specimen label, and the label's the law, and it provides all the information you're going to need. Here are a handful of herbicides that we commonly use that I would say would be good to have on your shelf. And that could be at your shop, at your workplace. You might be over an area with beautiful gardens, or you might be over more of a city parks. But either way, even if you're at home and if you can, afford to get some of these, I think they would be good to have. But if you're working on a tight budget, again, reach out to me. I'd be happy to try to help you through that. We'll talk specifically about some of these. So Plateau, this is a good herbicide for certain things. The active ingredient is a mazapic, 23%, a mazapic, and it is soil active. So notice, very important to understand, hey, this is a soil active herbicide. But a mazapic, Plateau, I guess, at some point it was made available to where others could also use a mazapic. So now there's a kind of a knockoff brand called Panoramic 2SL. So you can look into that one. But we do a lot of research on these things, and one thing that we noticed, even though the label looks the exact same, Panoramic has been sprayed under walnut trees and has killed them. So keep that in mind. But it hasn't killed, for example, oaks and hickories and other species. So those are sort of the details that we're involved with. But let's get back to just Plateau. It is soil active. It's a great herbicide choice for cool season grass control, such as tall fescue, orchard grass, brome, and many of the other cool season grasses, timothy and others. But it's also a good warm season grass control, Johnson grass and Japanese stilt grass. And I think most of y'all are probably working with trees and working in the woods. So you probably have Japanese stilt grass popping up. And if that's the case, Plateau is an excellent herbicide to control it. And it's also, since it's soil active, you can use it as a pre-emergence control and a post-emergence control. The main thing about Plateau is the maximum rate, and you can't use more than 12 ounces per acre per year. And then you get 1 week of pre-emergence control for every ounce applied. Arsenal, the active ingredient is a mazapir. Okay, so we're talking about Arsenal, but the active ingredient is mazapir. And then Arsenal alone, not Arsenal AC, the applicator's concentrate. Notice those are different. It's going to be really important as you look at a label to know what's the percent of this active ingredient. So if you just bought a jug of Arsenal, that's 27% active ingredient. But if you buy the applicator's concentrate, Arsenal AC, then that's a 53% active ingredient. So you have to adjust as you go and really understand what you're using. It is soil active. So I've got these two back to back, Plateau and Arsenal. So both of these are soil active, and Arsenal will potentially kill hardwoods, even mature trees. So we use this a lot in pine management, in forestry applications, but it's also a good warm season grass control. And that would include like Bermuda grass, Chinese silvergrass, even cattails and wetlands. We use it for that. So just kind of keep that in mind. Those are three big ones. And in some cases where people have planted native warm season grasses too dense, then we'll use Arsenal to thin those out. All right, and then cambium treatments. Yeah, if you're using Arsenal AC, then you could use 20% Arsenal AC and 80% water. And we usually just mix dye, a little bit of dye in a spray bottle. And then also you can bump that down, decrease that to 10%, and it's usually still pretty effective. And it won't kill, even if you use it as a broadcast, it won't kill most of your legumes and things like raspberries and blackberries or brambles. They're tolerant of Arsenal. This is just an example. Arsenal is also used, or imazapyr, I should say, is often used on alligator weed control. So it was mentioned she's from Columbia, Middle Tennessee. Some of you don't know about where that might be, but there's a lot of alligator weed in Middle Tennessee, and that needs to be controlled. And we're using a herbicide called Habitat, but that's the aquatic approved herbicide of Arsenal, and the active ingredient then is imazapyr. So when you're working in wetlands and around streams, you want to use aquatic approved herbicides. Next would be pasture guard, and pasture guard's kind of spelled funny. There's no U there. But pasture guard's a great one. I would say it's a good mix of two active ingredients, triclopyr and fluroxapyr. The soil activity is minimal, so you don't have to worry about it being soil active and impacting things maybe later on or for a period of time. But this is kind of the go-to, in my opinion, for Sericea lespedeza control. And now we're testing it on Bradford pear. Seems to be effective on Bradford pear. And then we have the Garlon products. This is 3A. But Garlon 3A, the active ingredient is triclopyr. All right, you can see that triclopyr, the active ingredient. You could even buy knockoff brands of Garlon like Element 3A or triclopyr. It's called triclopyr straight up. But this is a really good one, kind of a go-to for people working in the woods because we say it just kind of stays put. It's not soil active. And if you use it precisely, then you're not going to have a negative impact on surrounding vegetation, for example. 3A is the amine formulation. That's a salt formulation. It's water soluble. So this is the one that we use for all the stem injections. Cut stump, girdle and spray, hack and squirt, all of those. You need to be using 3A, not necessarily triclopyr 4. And it's very good for broadleaf control. And I've used it even when I worked in South Carolina. I didn't get into, with my bio. I think that's fine, to mention that and kind of where I'm from. But I've worked throughout the Southeast, and this was a go-to herbicide for sweet gum control, and particularly on quail plantations where they're managing for wild quail populations, trying to control sweet gum. And Garlon does not kill grasses. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. It will not harm grasses. It's more for broadleaf control. For cambium treatments, we usually recommend a 50% triclopyr 3A or Garlon 3A, and then 50% water and a little bit of dye. Garlon 4 is different, okay? And it's getting hot. It's starting to get hot outside, so you got to be careful with any herbicide, period, but especially if you see ester. So you can see there, cousin Esther, she's volatile, right? But the ester formulation means that this is an herbicide that can volatilize, typically above 85 degrees, and we want to avoid that. We don't want to kill trees. We don't want to kill somebody's farm crop and those sort of things. So you do have to be careful with the ester formulation. Anyway, this one is very good, though, on waxy leaf species that you're trying to, penetrate the epidermis and allow that herbicide to really do the work that needs to be done to control whatever it is you're spraying. So Garlon 4 has its place. One thing I really like about Garlon 4 is this is the one that we use for basil bark applications since it's oil soluble. So you're not using Garlon 3A for basil bark applications. You'd be using Garlon 4. So kind of keep that in mind. And that's when you mix herbicide, usually at a higher percentage, around, let's say 20% of herbicide, and the other 80% would be diesel fuel or a basil oil. And one thing that I like about this, I don't think this treatment or method works. I don't think many people do it much at all, if at all. And this is a great one because one, the best time of year to do this is in the fall and the winter. So fall, winter months, you don't have to worry about getting tagged by yellow jackets or bit by a copperhead. You can get around because there's no foliage on the shrubs or vegetation. Everything has senesced. So it's easy to walk. It's easy to see the tree of heaven or whatever it is that you're spraying. And then you just, walk around these trees, the base of them, and you don't even have to walk around. You can just spray the one side. And if it's a small tree, you take one step, spray the other side, and you're just soaking that tree from basically the knees down. And then that herbicide is going to penetrate through the bark and effectively control the species that it's designed to do. I really like this. If you need to use a lot of it, then you can buy the barrels of basil oil, and they come in usually 15-gallon barrels. And then if you just take a 2.5-gallon jug of Garlon 4 and you mix it with that 15-gallon barrel, it gives you a 17% solution, and that should provide control on large tree of heaven or mimosa or whatever it is you're trying to spray, most things. The main thing about basil bark treatment is we use it on thin bark species. So keep that in mind, thin barked species. And then another thing is it's really designed for smaller stems. So 6 inches or less would be smaller stem species of both shrubs and trees. But if it's a thin bark species and it's a gigantic tree of heaven, then it's very effective. It could be a 30-inch tree of heaven. You use this application, it should work. And you shouldn't have any suckering. Roundup products, a lot of people are afraid of glyphosate, and careful what you read. But I will say I'm not, this is a very good product, and we always want to be safe and always apply glyphosate at appropriate times and very selectively and very precisely. Really important things to keep in mind here. But you want a Roundup product if you're using it for stuff like this that has at least a 41% active ingredient. All right, anything less may not do the trick. There are other products that have at least 53%. So let's there are knockoff brands with glyphosate as the active ingredient at least 41%. And you'll see just a few notes here. It can be a go-to herbicide for both herbaceous and woody plant control, except for the olives, Elaeagnus and Oriental bittersweet. And it's fantastic for cool season and warm season grass control, depending on the time of year and the type of grass that you're spraying. But most of the time we would spray 2 quarts per acre with a non-onyx surfactant or an MSO, a methylated seed oil. You might want to jot this down, but 2% solution for early herbaceous control, 2.5% solution for a late growing season herbaceous control, and generally about a 3% solution for woody control, and that might include blackberry depending on your objectives. We can use glyphosate for cambium treatment, so those stem injections that we talked about, we usually do that at a 50% solution. And then you get into the costs. So this is just an example. If you mix up a bottle of herbicide, Arsenal AC, there's a sticker shock there. It'll scare you. You're like, man, I can't afford this. But it goes a long ways. So Arsenal AC, even though, it's a lot of money for a 2.5-gallon jug, you can see it goes a long ways, but it's really about the same price as Element 3A or Garlon 3A when you put it in a bottle, because you're mixing less Arsenal per water versus more of the triclopyr per bottle. All right, so here we go. Stem injection options. If you want to jot this down, if you can see it all, this is in a publication that we're working on currently. I think the main thing to write down that I haven't gone over is mixtures 1 and 2, and I really like mixture 2. Mixture 2 gives you more of a broad spectrum control on trees that you're trying to treat and control on a particular site. And it works really well, and very broad spectrum. And I guess I should mention this, but if you use Garlon 3A, it won't effectively control all the species, right? And you can see a little short list there. Same with Arsenal AC. It won't kill a pine tree, for example, or even a cedar, some of the legume species. So it's important to think about, okay, well, if I use a mixture, that gives me more broad spectrum control. And that way, no matter what you run into out there, there's so many non-native invasive species that if you use like mixture two, you're probably going to effectively control whatever you treat. And then this is just real quick. Katie actually helped me put this together. Very informal videos. They're short. They're on YouTube. And part two then gets into the real details of how to do some of this work. All right, and this is just an example. Here's Microstegium, the genus for Japanese stilt grass. And you can control it. It's an annual grass. And let me click here. This was burned in March 2016. This is at a Girl Scout camp, and you can see all the Japanese stilt grass and the graduate students working through there. Burned in March 2016 as site prep. Then they went in and sprayed it in July 2017. And then here's the following year, July 2018. That's all native ground cover. Those are native plants, and that was a result of one spray application. Not to say there's not any Japanese stilt grass not out there, but very little, and then we just go back and spot spray. Here's Oriental Bittersweet, July 2015. And then this was sprayed with Triclopyr 3A. And then here it is in August 2015. And then here it is with native ground cover. So again, I go to a lot of meetings, right? I visit with a lot of professionals, and a lot of people just kind of fuss about non-native invasive vegetation. What are we going to do? Well, do something. And oftentimes, if you use herbicide appropriately, that's in conjunction or in addition to or in combination with a lot of the mechanical, even the goats and the other tools that we have in our toolkit, you can usually effectively control these species. This is one I want to sit on for just a minute. Notice the mixing herbicides. This would give you then more of a broad spectrum control. The top one's just an example of dealing with invasive olives, specifically in this case, autumn olive. So there's an example of mixing a couple different herbicides that work very well to smoke autumn olive. And then here's a bottom one, though, that's kind of maybe a go-to to consider. Now, the only way you're going to learn how to mix this, I've got first and all that, so that may be confusing, is go to the rodeo label. And in the rodeo herbicide label in CDMS herbicide, when you get it to Google, you go to the CDMS, you're going to type in rodeo. And then as you look through the label, and actually you don't have to look through it, just do control find, right? And it's a PDF. So it'll go straight to this right here, which is this mixture of, and goes through the mixing procedures. If this one needs to be first, and this is how much to add. So I don't want to get into too much of the details with that, but I like the broad spectrum control because then as you're out there with a backpack sprayer, you see something. If you spray bush honeysuckle with, what did we say? Triclopyr is not going to control it, but if you spray it with this mix, it probably will, right? And then you can turn right around and spray Japanese stiltgrass, and then you can turn right around and spray this, and then you can turn right around and spray that. So, that broad spectrum control can be extremely valuable when you're working in the field. So here's and we didn't do this talk. They asked me to give this presentation, but again, this is not a commercial or an advertisement, but this is soon. This is out with outside, we have 2 outside reviewers that are looking at it now, and I think this will hopefully be a helpful guide for all of you. So just as an example, this will be out here in about, I hope 3 months, depending on how quick commercial and marketing work on it and get it published and printed, but it'll be available on the web as well. And you can see we've got all this stuff, but basically just a real quick, I like to call it a cheat sheet. So then if you know, hey, I've got Bradford pear, what am I going to treat it with? This is just an example of how that'll be laid out. Not a very lengthy publication. It's just kind of a cheat sheet that we're wrapping up. Always wear PPE when you use herbicides, and that's no joke. I mean, seriously, wear PPE. Protect your eyes. As far as a mask, the RZ mask is pretty comfortable, so I always usually recommend that one. Long sleeves. Don't wear the gloves that you see in your doctor's office. Get at least the 14 mil natural gloves. Those are going to be thicker. Get the ones that are a little longer to cover your wrists and even your long sleeves. But be diligent about this. Wear rubber boots. Don't wash your clothes your outer clothes that you wear when you apply herbicides with your other laundry. So just be real careful and wear PPE. Be diligent there. And then be cautious. Don't be scared about using herbicides. All the herbicides that I just mentioned are non-restrictive use herbicides. That means that anybody can go to co-op and buy them off the shelf. You don't have to have a license. I would recommend you do that. We have an awesome pesticide education program here at UT. Highly recommend it. But again, these are non-restricted use herbicides that I just mentioned. You do want to be cautious, but know that even though arsenal sounds scary, it's actually very safe. And then the phone app. This is something the college students a lot of times, particularly the wildlife students, they tend to struggle with math more than the forestry students. So look into this phone app where you can enter rates. It gives you ounces per tank. So Tank Mix by Corteva. There's an app you could put on your phone, and that may be helpful as you're trying to figure things out. And in final notes, I would always recommend add appropriate surfactants. Look into that. Use the one that's going to be most effective. Methylated seed oil for some things may be more effective, right, than a non-ionic surfactant, NIS. Calibrate equipment. We have lots of UT Extension pubs on calibrating equipment. The department head here in Plant Sciences, he's got a great one on calibrating boom and boomless sprayers. It's a one-page deal. It's great. So those are easy to find. And then expect, though, additional treatments are going to be necessary. This is, you got to be in it to win it. So you got to do monitoring and you got to do spot applications and just have that expectation. Hey, I'm going to have to come back. This is not just a one and done type operation. And then follow the label. This is something that I'm working hard on, even at my own place. Here's butterfly weed, and I've got pollinators all over the place. But those are areas where I've sprayed things like fescue and Johnson grass, and I've killed bush honeysuckle and tree of heaven, mimosa. Had them all, and I still have some that I'm working on, some spots. But it's pretty amazing, if you really get after it, how native species will respond. If you do decide to plant, I guess the take-home message here with that, and I'm sure you all hear it all the time, plant more than one tree, right? And then plant multiple species. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. I get a lot of phone calls here with my job, what killed my tree, or, why are my pin oaks dying? Well, you planted the whole golf course with pin oak and only pin oak. So you're going to have a problem when you have bacterial leaf scorch or whatever it is. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. And if you do plant lots of species and many individuals. So that's all I've got. I appreciate your all's time. I think you all take over from here.
Chris, thank you so much. Also, what a lovely slide to end on. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for kind of guiding us through this conversation around invasive management, especially specializing in tree management. It looks like we've got quite a few comments that have come in over the last hour or so. So Katie, I will pass it along to you so that you can start going through the questions and we can get those answered.
Yes, thank you, Imagine. Okay, so first question. After cutting down major Chinese privet, I now just mow, but it is still growing. Will it ever give up trying to grow?
Yeah, no. Yeah, I would recommend using an herbicide on the Chinese privet. So it sounds like this is an area that's mowed frequently and they want grasses or some kind of herbaceous plant. Is that right? So I'm going to show this. I want to show again, but so here we go. Here's that publication that we're working on. And all you're going to have to do then is you're just going to go down, say, okay, Chinese privet is a shrub. And then we've got glyphosate at a 41% solution. We have Arsenal AC which is imazapyr, and then we have Garlon 4. But in that case, you're using a foliar application, and if you're spot spraying, you'd use a 2% solution of glyphosate to control the Chinese privet. So 2% solution plus a NIS, non-ionic surfactant. So we hope to have, that information out very soon, and we can get all those questions answered.
All right. Next question. There's an empty lot in my neighborhood donated for community, or excuse me, an empty lot in my neighborhood donated for community garden has major euonymus invasion. People thought it was actual tree branches. Is there a recommended herbicide treatment?
Yeah, here we go again. So that's going to be a vine. And then when you go to that, you're going to find then that winter creeper triclopyr is probably going to be your best option. And I would use triclopyr 3A if it were me. I wouldn't use triclopyr 4 just to get into that. That one's a tough plant. That's a toughie. So we're looking at about a 5% solution plus the non-ionic surfactant. Let's see, let me look here what we say on time of year. So I would hit it in late winter. That's going to be a good time to spray it and before everything else starts to green up. And that's one good thing about spraying privet and winter creeper and all these plants. If you'll see this chart very soon that we're working on. But a lot of times, whether it's before bud break, right before, or even after leaf fall, as those things are still green and you spray a herbicide like this one, triclopyr 3A, you're not going to have a negative impact then on other surrounding vegetation that has gone dormant.
Okay, I'm gonna ask the other questions, but first, just because I know we're getting close on time, do you mind if I share my screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, let me pull it up. All right, so I'm just sharing the QR code for people who are seeking those ISA CEUs as I continue to ask these questions.
Okay.
All right, so next question. Roundup no longer contains glyphosate in the big box stores. Where can you still get it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Good observation. Somebody actually looked at the label, so that's good. A lot of people just go grab it. Any feed and seed store usually provides or has herbicides that they'll sell for farmers, right? And that's generally what you're doing. You're going and you're purchasing a product that farmers are using maybe on their properties. So co-op is a great example in Tennessee.
Next question. What mix and treatment timing for English ivy infesting mixed hardwood and pine forest?
Yeah, I won't reference the sheet here. I'm referencing the sheet, but it's kind of in my head too, so no need to point it out. It'll be on there. Glyphosate at a 5% solution, 4 to 5% solution as soon as it's putting on new leaves. So that was happening at least in our area here in the Tennessee Valley probably about 6 weeks ago. So you got to hit it when it's putting on new leaves. So that's going to be, right after bud break, and a 4 to 5% solution of glyphosate mixed with a non-ionic surfactant. That's worked very well. And then we also recommend, multiple applications. So do it again in the fall, but really that spring application is going to be key when it's putting on new leaves.
Thank you. Next question. Is rooting for stilt grass prior to its seeding an effective control?
Okay, so what was that word? Brooding?
Rooting.
Oh, yeah. I got you. Yeah, so Japanese stilt grass, we're generally going to use the plateau or panoramic. Those are the two products. And if you want to use it as a pre-emergence control, you can. So people, if they know exactly where it's at, maybe they've outlined it or whatever, the pin flags, and they want to just make sure they suppress it before it pops up, then it's going to prevent it from germinating as a pre-emergence control. But if you want to be kind of on the safe side and make sure you're spraying the right areas, even right now. Japanese stiltgrass about this tall, and you could go out and of course spray it now. But there is a perfect time of year spray it post emergence, and I would wait a little while using plateau. But you can use it as a pre-emergence, and it won't germinate.
Okay. I've got some more questions, but I also know it's 1 o'clock. So if anyone is on here and needs to get off the webinar, please feel free to get off and scan that QR code. And Kevin also dropped a link in the chat if you're seeking those ISA CEUs. Chris, do you have time to keep answering a few questions?
I do, and then the people that need to get back to work or do whatever they're doing, if they ask you a question, I'll send you, you can email those to me, and then you can send a whole list of Q&A, back to them. I'll try to answer their questions, hopefully, and, get those answered.
Okay, thank you. All right. Next question. Where do you get these surfactants? What are some brand names?
Yeah, surfactant it's an adjuvant, but I would, if y'all get serious about this, again, University of Tennessee Pesticide Education Program, PSEP or something, y'all should look into that. Get just some minimal training. I think that would be worthwhile. As a private applicator, that's really all most people need, unless they're in the profession. They're generally a commercial applicator. So in doing that, then you can learn all these details. But as far as surfactants, they're pretty cheap, and there are lots of brands. So they're going to be at co-op, for example, or a feed and seed store, and they're going to be, in a smaller container because you're not going to use very much. Yeah. And don't use Dawn dish soap. I did that early in my career, and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, that's fine." But these are people I was working with, and they're like, "Well, I think 2 jugs. We've always put 2 jugs in the sprayer, and it works great." I'm like, "Man, we need to calibrate anything?" So don't fall into that trap. Make sure you actually use a non-ionic surfactant that you buy from the feed and seed store. But yeah, relatively inexpensive.
Thank you. Is mechanical pulling or spraying better to remove privet honeysuckle over a medium-sized area?
Yeah, I almost had this as part of my presentation. Got a couple pictures, but I've worked on projects where we do the privet puller thing, and there's 30 people there helping, and it's fun, right? It's a very rewarding experience. But at the end of the day, we treated like 2 acres. So maybe even a half an acre, depending on the day and the people that are volunteering. So usually, if you've got a large amount, good coverage of an invasive species, I'm going to use herbicides. It's so much faster, and if used appropriately, it's very safe. So, although I'm not telling y'all not to do that. That's fine if you want to use privet pullers and stuff, but again, I'm working on very large landscapes. If a state park calls me, they have, 30 or 300 acres of privet. They don't have 1/100th of an acre. So if you're dealing with 1/100th of an acre, privet puller would be great. If you're dealing with more than that, on a landscape scale, you probably want to use herbicides.
All right. This was a question that we received before the webinar, but they asked how to control mock orange in our woods. It is out of control now, a bumper crop with leaves. Could you please advise?
Yeah, so that's the trifoliate orange. It's kind of a tough one. So you could use basil bark treatment using the triclopyr 4 at 20% solution. And by doing that after senescence, when during the dormant season, I think that'd be easier to kind of move around. But they could also treat it with broadcast as well. I'll tell you what, email me that one, tag it, and I'll get back to that person specifically a little bit more.
You kind of touched on this earlier, but someone asked, how do I, as a homeowner, know which products I am authorized to use? How do I determine whether a contractor has the necessary credentials to apply specific herbicides? And do I have the right or responsibility to require a contractor to use the appropriate PPE?
Yeah, I mean, that's a discussion you want to have with somebody that you're about to hire. Always look to make sure somebody has a good business record. They probably have references if they have a business. You can call people in the community that's used that company. And yeah, if they're using any kind of pesticide, they should be following the label. They should be wearing PPE. And if not, that should be a little bit of a red flag. So go ahead and cover that in your beginning discussions before you hire someone. And then they should be a card carrying pesticide applicator. And most of these companies, of course, they'll be commercial applicators and they should really know what they're doing. And a lot of times, if they're professionals, they work really efficiently and get the job done fast. As far as that first part of that question, I would just recommend whoever asks that to get some training themselves. But I do think, what I was covering here during this presentation specifically, I wasn't talking about any restricted use pesticides. So, yeah, go forth and do good things, wear PPE but yeah, get some training if you want to do it yourself. I wasn't going to mention this, but sometimes we come up with these home products and try them. And a lot of times, if you're doing that between the cracks in your sidewalk, that's fine. But on a large scale, I'm not going to go out and spray vinegar on things and stuff. So,
All right, and I'm gonna let this be the last question since we're over time, but have you seen any new invasives or trends in which species are most problematic over the past 5 to 10 years?
yeah, that's a great question. That depends on where you're at. So Kogon grass is now in Tennessee. It's really popping up in some places, and even more so, it's more spread than throughout the state than I think we know, particularly along the interstate. So Kogon grass is a new one that's on the rise. A couple others, particularly if you're in the Blue Ridge of Tennessee, that's the higher elevation counties of Upper East Tennessee. Japanese knotweed is all over the place in our riparian areas throughout our stream corridors and stuff. So that's a real problem. If you go to Asheville, North Carolina, just look as soon as you are about to leave Tennessee and you cross into North Carolina, be on the lookout for Chinese silvergrass. It's everywhere. And then there are some that they're just still a real problem, and we're fighting a good fight, but I don't think we're not doing that enough on a landscape scale, all kind of working together to try to control these species.
All righty. Well, I'm gonna stop it there and imagine I'll let you wrap us up.
Well, that was a lot of really good questions. I was writing down some notes myself while we were going over everything. Thank you guys all so much for joining us for another TUFC webinar. Thank you very much to Chris and to Katie and to Kevin for tirelessly doing all the things that they do to bring us together, and for Chris for his time today. We appreciate you all, and we will see you in just a few weeks for our next speaker with Giorgio Arsenio. And thank you guys. Have a great day.